There is a shift that happens not by chance, but by conscious direction of your biology. I want you to imagine this. You're not limited by your genetics, your past, or your environment. You're limited only by your unawareness of how powerful your system already is. You're carrying inside your skull the most adaptable, dangerous, and brilliant technology the universe has ever created, the human brain, but it doesn't unlock itself. It doesn't become a lead on autopilot. It requires precision, real tools, applied consistently with purpose. And when you use them, you change. The truth is, there is a brain hack that makes you significantly smarter and more dangerous, but not in the cartoon sense of danger. I'm talking about the kind of dangerous that changes rooms when you walk in, the kind that walks toward discomfort, speaks with clarity, and doesn't flinch in the face of chaos. And it starts with understanding how to regulate your internal state, because focus is not magic. Intelligence isn't luck. These are states you generate. You direct your physiology with precision, and the brain responds in kind by reorganizing itself to meet the demands you place upon it. When you expose yourself deliberately to discomfort, like the cold, like fatigue, like challenge, your system releases norepinephrine. That's not just a chemical. That's clarity. That's the molecule of grit. And when you get good at releasing that on purpose, through breath, vision, or cold, you are no longer reacting to life. You are commanding it. But we go deeper. Your brain doesn't grow from effort alone. It grows when you sleep. Deep sleep is the forge of intelligence. If you want to get smarter, better, sharper, protect your sleep like your future depends on it. Because it does. Memory, insight, strategy, they're coded in your dreams. And then there's dopamine, not the drug, the discipline. Dopamine isn't just pleasure. It's motivation. It's pursuit. When you learn to find reward in the process, in the pain of training, in the silence of focus, you begin to build a system that's unstoppable. Because you're not waiting for results to feel good. You breathe deeply, cyclically, because the breath is the remote control of your nervous system. You train your visual field, widen it to calm, narrow it to focus. Because where your gaze goes, your mind follows. You stack these tools until they become identity. And then you focus, not endlessly, but cyclically. You follow your brain's Ultradian rhythms, 90 minutes on, rest, repeat, and you carve deep, stable neural tracks. Your intelligence isn't a gift. It's an architecture you build with practice. But let me tell you the final piece, the piece people run from. You have to seek out the edges on purpose. You must engage with the difficult thing daily. Stress, deliberate, calibrated, intentional is the signal for growth. You grow because you are challenged, not in spite of it. You become more dangerous when you move toward what others retreat from. The mountain, the cold, the unknown, they are not obstacles. They are invitations. And when you live like that, deliberately engaging your biology, commanding your chemistry, and shaping your brain, you become something else entirely. You become the person who doesn't just survive reality. Bend it. Deliberate cold exposure is one of the most powerful, underestimated tools available to the human nervous system. When the body is exposed to cold, whether through cold showers, ice baths, or immersion in cold water, it triggers a profound physiological response designed to promote alertness, resilience, and adaptive strength at the level of the brain and body. This response is not simply a matter of willpower or toughness. It is deeply rooted in the neurochemical landscape of the human system, and when used intentionally, it can be harnessed to significantly enhance mental clarity, cognitive performance, and emotional regulation. When you immerse yourself in cold, the body responds by releasing a surge of norepinephrine, a neuromodulator closely tied to attention, focus, and vigilance. This release is not subtle. It can increase by 200 to 500% in just minutes. The mind becomes laser focused. The senses heightened, the internal chatter quieted. What you're experiencing in that moment is not suffering. It's clarity. Cold acts as a powerful reset to the brain, flooding the system with a chemical environment optimized for learning, adaptability, and drive. Importantly, this isn't just about enduring discomfort. The point is not to prove how long you can withstand freezing temperatures. The point is to leverage a very specific biological response. Deliberate cold exposure triggers vasoconstriction, narrowing of the blood vessels, which is followed by a rebound vasodilation after you rewarm. This cycle improves cardiovascular tone, promotes circulation, and over time builds the body's capacity to handle stress. That stress resilience is not only physical, it translates into emotional and cognitive robustness. You become harder to shake, more centered under pressure, more present in demanding moments. Cold also trains your control over the autonomic nervous system, the part of your brain and body responsible for fight or flight responses, and equally for calm and restoration. When you step into cold water, the sympathetic nervous system activates instantly. Your heart rate spikes. Your breath shortens. You enter a mild panic, but this is the training ground. The moment you bring your breath under control, take long exhalations, and begin to regulate your inner state while still in the cold, you're doing something profound. You're showing your nervous system that you can control internal responses regardless of the external chaos. Ruckias. This is neuroplasticity in action. You're literally rewiring your brain to respond to stress with composure rather than reactivity. There's also a hormonal effect. Cold exposure causes a measurable rise in dopamine levels that can last hours after the exposure ends. Not only does this elevate mood, it sharpens motivation and increases your capacity to initiate effort. That's key, because intelligence is not just about what you know, but your ability to apply effort consistently over time. Dopamine is your engine for effort. And cold is the key that turns that engine on. Consistency is critical. A few minutes a day, several times a week, is enough to create lasting change in your physiology and brain chemistry. You don't need ice-cold extremes. Even water temperatures around 10-15 degrees C, 50-60 degrees F, are effective so long as the experience is uncomfortable enough to signal the nervous system. The discomfort is the signal. You don't need to suffer, but you do need to get uncomfortable. Intentionally, repeatedly, and with control. What cold teaches, perhaps more than anything, is agency. It teaches that you can override the impulse to retreat, that you can stay calm when every cell in your body is screaming for comfort, that you can choose your response even when the environment is hostile. Over time, this becomes more than a physical practice. It becomes a way of being. You start to approach challenge, not avoid it. You start to see stress, not as something to manage, but something to master. But you become more focused, more capable, more dangerous, not through theory, but through real embodied adaptation. Sleep is not passive rest. It is the most active period of neurological transformation your brain undergoes in a 24-hour cycle. While the world goes quiet, your brain begins the most important work of your life. Wiring, rewiring, pruning, and consolidating. This process is called sleep-driven neuroplasticity, and it is the foundational mechanism by which you become more intelligent, more skilled, and more emotionally stable over time. If you're learning, training, healing, or adapting in any way, and you're not sleeping with intention and structure, you're leaving 50% or more of your growth on the table. During wakefulness, your brain is in a record mode. It's taking in information, experiencing novelty, building fragile circuits as you read, practice, or perform. But those circuits are unstable. They're temporary, like writing on a whiteboard. If you stay awake too long, they begin to degrade. They are not locked in. They are not integrated. They are not integrated. They do not become skill or memory until one thing happens. You sleep. When you enter deep sleep, particularly stages of slow wave sleep, the brain begins a process of synaptic consolidation. This is where important connections are strengthened and irrelevant ones are weakened. This pruning mechanism is vital. It's not just about remembering. It's about making space, streamlining neural networks so that the essential signals fire more rapidly and efficiently. The brain is optimizing itself, compressing data, discarding noise, and sculpting you into a more capable version of yourself. But it doesn't stop at memory. Neuroplasticity also refers to emotional recalibration, decision-making refinement, and motor skill enhancement. The REM phase of sleep, which typically occurs later in the night, plays a critical role in these dimensions. It's in REM that emotional experiences are processed without the full weight of stress hormones. This is where traumatic or intense events are stripped of their emotional charge, allowing for growth without the scars. Emotional intelligence is, in large part, born in REM sleep. Motor skills, whether playing an instrument, lifting weights, or executing a precise technical maneuver, are not simply improved through practice alone. They're solidified during sleep. The brain replays activity patterns experienced during the day, reinforcing the neuromuscular circuits that led to success and suppressing those that didn't. This means that the hours you spend asleep after practice are just as important as the practice itself. A night of fragmented or shortened sleep disrupts this process. Skill improvement plateaus or even reverses. But with deep, high-quality sleep, improvement accelerates even without additional waking practice. Timing and consistency matter. The architecture of sleep unfolds in cycles, typically lasting around 90 minutes each, alternating between light sleep, deep sleep, and REM. The deepest stages of restorative neuroplastic sleep tend to occur in the first half of the night. This means that delaying sleep or cutting it short directly reduces your capacity for brain remodeling. Just 1 hour lost can have disproportionate effects on learning, focus, and emotional stability the next day. There are also key neurochemical players involved in this transformation. During deep sleep, growth hormone is released in pulses, aiding in tissue repair, but also in supporting neural development. Astrocytes, supportive cells in the brain, engage in a kind of cleanup operation known as the glymphatic system, clearing out metabolic waste that builds up during intense cognitive activity. This includes beta amyloid, a protein linked to cognitive decline when not cleared efficiently. High-quality sleep is your brain's sanitation system and architect working in concert, clearing out debris while simultaneously reinforcing what matters most. You do not get smarter, faster, or more emotionally resilient during the day alone. You get better because of what happens when you sleep. The circuits you're building through effort, challenge, and repetition are only transformed into ability through this sacred period of unconscious reconstruction. When you honor sleep, you're not just resting, you're rebuilding, you're upgrading. You're stepping into a smarter, stronger, more formidable version of yourself, ever lifting a finger. Dopamine is often misunderstood as simply the chemical of pleasure, but in truth, it is the molecule of motivation, pursuit, and cognitive engagement. It is the internal currency that determines how driven you feel, how resilient you are in the face of adversity, and how sharply your brain tracks toward your goals. Calibrating the dopamine system means learning to regulate it consciously by understanding how it works and by aligning your behaviors with mechanisms that support long-term growth rather than short-term gratification. It is not about chasing dopamine hits. It's about constructing a system that lets you generate dopamine from effort itself. At its core, dopamine functions on a principle of anticipation. It rises not when you receive a reward, but when you anticipate one. This is where real power lies, in being able to set your mind on a future state and generate motivation now, before the outcome arrives. This is why people who learn to focus on the process rather than the result are far more consistent and effective. When you attach dopamine to the act of doing, showing up, pushing through, learning, lifting, studying, you start to reinforce a feedback loop that makes the hard path feel satisfying. It trains your brain to see friction as fuel. Most people unconsciously break their dopamine system. They flood it with high dopamine stimuli, constant scrolling, fast food, digital rewards, none of which require effort. When the system is overwhelmed by these artificial surges, the baseline dopamine levels drop. That's when life starts to feel flat, uninspired, hard to start, hard to care about. Even things that once felt meaningful begin to lose their weight. This is not depression. This is dopamine dysregulation. And the good news is that it's reversible. Calibrating your dopamine system starts with subtraction. Removing or reducing excessive stimulation helps restore the sensitivity of dopamine receptors. But more than that, it requires that you retrain your brain to associate dopamine with effortful action. For example, when you choose to go for a difficult run, write a page of something meaningful, or stay focused on a cognitively demanding task, then consciously acknowledge the effort itself as rewarding, you are rewiring your system. That internal dialogue matters. When the brain hears, I love that I'm doing this, even though it's hard, it starts to connect struggle with satisfaction. That is neurochemical alchemy. That is the key to sustainable motivation. Dopamine also works in contrast. Its effects are relative to what came before. If your day is filled with mindless indulgence, a meaningful challenge feels dull. But if your baseline is discipline and simplicity, then even small rewards feel profound. This is why intermittent reward, challenge, and restraint are so powerful. They sharpen the contrast. They amplify dopamine signal. When you delay gratification, you don't lose pleasure, you increase its impact. You stretch the dopamine response, making it deeper and more rewarding. Another dimension of calibration is novelty. The dopamine system thrives on change and progress. This doesn't mean switching goals constantly. It means structuring your path so that you can see improvement. This is why tracking progress is so critical. When the brain sees that you are better than yesterday, even by 1%, it gets a dopamine pulse. This motivates further effort. It's not about massive success. It's about micro wins stacked consistently. Sleep, nutrition, sunlight, and movement also support dopamine production. Deep rest replenishes the reserves. Exposure to morning sunlight anchors the circadian rhythm, supporting dopamine release during the day. Tyrosine-rich foods provide the building blocks. Physical activity, particularly intense, goal-oriented training, boosts dopamine levels naturally and durably. All of these inputs work together to raise your baseline over time. True intelligence and danger, mental resilience, emotional clarity, and unshakable pursuit emerge when your dopamine system is under your command, not hijacked by the environment. When you link your dopamine not to the reward, but to the effort required to earn it, you become a different type of human. You become someone who can go longer, think deeper, and act with purpose, even when no one is watching. Cyclic deep breathing, particularly through the method known as physiological size, is one of the most immediate and effective ways to regulate the autonomic nervous system. It's not just a relaxation technique. It's a neurological reset button, deeply rooted in human physiology and evolution. This simple yet profound practice works directly on the circuits that govern stress, focus, and emotional control. It is the breath pattern your body naturally turns to when it's trying to restore balance after a period of heightened arousal, panic, or exertion. When done deliberately, it becomes a powerful tool to take control of your internal state in real time. The physiological sigh consists of 2 inhales through the nose, followed by a long, extended exhale through the mouth. The first inhale expands the lungs partially, and the second, shorter inhale tops them off, recruiting tiny air sacs called alveoli that often collapse under stress or shallow breathing. This second inhale opens them up, allowing for more efficient gas exchange. Then the long exhale serves to offload a large amount of carbon dioxide in a controlled way, which brings the nervous system from sympathetic fight or flight toward parasympathetic rest and digest, dominance. That shift is tangible. It slows the heart rate, lowers blood pressure, and brings clarity to the mind. What makes this technique uniquely powerful is that it can be done in under a minute and still create a profound shift in your internal state. 1 or 2 physiological sighs can downregulate a heightened stress response almost instantly. This is not just anecdotal. Research shows that this form of cyclic deep breathing is more effective than mindfulness meditation, box breathing, or traditional slow breathing in acute stress reduction. It works because it taps into hardwired physiological mechanisms that evolved for survival. You're not calming yourself through willpower or distraction. You're sending a real-time signal to the brainstem that the danger has passed, that it's safe to return to baseline. This breathing pattern can be used before high-stakes performance situations, such as public speaking competition or intellectual challenges, to bring the brain into an optimal state. It doesn't sedate you. It centers you. It enhances your capacity to respond rather than react. It helps decouple emotion from cognition, allowing you to think clearly under pressure. When you train yourself to access this state regularly, you begin to rewire your baseline. You don't just feel calmer, you become more resilient to stress altogether. But the real transformation happens when this practice becomes habitual, not just reactive. If you build a daily ritual of cyclic deep breathing, whether in the morning, after work, or before bed, you begin to train your nervous system to spend more time in a regulated state. You become more aware of when tension rises and more capable of releasing it without suppressing emotion or losing control. Over time, this raises your stress threshold. Situations that once triggered anxiety or impulsivity now meet a nervous system trained in control, patience, and presence. This breathwork also sharpens focus. By controlling respiration, You modulate the activity of the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and executive function. In moments of fatigue, distraction, or overwhelm, a few rounds of physiological sighs can bring your attention back online. It's not just about relaxation, it's about precision. You learn to wield your attention like a blade, not let it drift or dull under pressure. Cyclic deep breathing is a form of mastery over the self. It doesn't require equipment, environment, or time commitment. It only requires awareness and intention. And the effects are cumulative. Each time you choose breath over reaction, control over chaos, you're reinforcing a neural pathway of strength, clarity, and composure. You become someone who knows how to stay calm in the storm, focused in the noise, and powerful in the presence of pressure, not by accident. Visual system modulation is one of the most direct and underutilized tools for regulating mental state, sharpening focus, and restoring balance within the nervous system. Your eyes are not just devices for seeing the external world. They are extensions of the brain itself. In fact, the retina is neural tissue, and the way your visual system is engaged sends immediate signals to deep brain centers responsible for alertness, stress, and cognitive performance. By learning to deliberately control your visual field, how you direct your gaze, what you focus on, and how broad or narrow your vision becomes, you gain access to a powerful internal control mechanism that operates far below the level of thought. The state of your visual system is tightly linked to your level of arousal. When you are in a state of calm, your gaze naturally softens and you begin to take in a wider field of view. This panoramic vision sends signals to the brainstem and autonomic nervous system that you are safe, that no immediate threat is present, and that it is appropriate to enter a more parasympathetic state where digestion, recovery, and long-term planning can occur. On the other hand, when you are stressed or highly focused, your vision becomes tunnel-like. The pupils constrict, the visual field narrows, and your gaze locks in on a specific target. This is your body preparing for action, fight, flight, or intense mental engagement. Neither of these states is good or bad on its own, but learning to control them deliberately gives you access to adaptive control over your internal experience. When you feel overwhelmed, anxious, or reactive, widening your field of vision, what's known as panoramic or optic flow vision, can immediately shift your physiology. Simply by consciously relaxing your gaze and becoming aware of the space around you, not just what's directly in front of you, you can bring your nervous system back into a state of calm. This is not psychological. It's physiological. It's physiological. It happens because specific neurons in the midbrain respond to patterns of motion and space in the peripheral field, downregulating stress-related circuits and rebalancing your internal state. Conversely, when you need to drive intense focus on a task, a deadline, or a physical challenge, narrowing your vision and locking your gaze on a single point can enhance cognitive and muscular precision. This deliberate focus activates the noradrenergic system and sharpens the activity of the prefrontal cortex. It boosts your brain's signal-to-noise ratio, helping you zero in on what matters and ignore distraction. Athletes, special operators, and high-level performers use this shift in vision before a major task, not because it looks cool, but because it primes the entire nervous system for action. You can do the same at your desk, in the gym, or in a conversation by using your eyes as a lever to signal intensity. Light itself also plays a critical role in visual system modulation. Exposure to bright, full-spectrum light, especially natural sunlight in the early part of the day, sets the timing of your circadian clock and supports optimal levels of alertness, mood, and energy. The cells in the eye that respond to light, specifically melanopsin containing retinal ganglion cells, send signals to the hypothalamus that influence everything from hormone release to temperature regulation. Just 2 to 10 minutes of outdoor light in the morning can have cascading benefits across the entire brain-body system. Miss that window consistently, and you may find your focus dull, your sleep disrupted, and your mood unstable. Understanding and using visual system modulation means you no longer have to be at the mercy of your internal state. You can use your vision to steer it. When stress rises, you widen your gaze. When precision is needed, you narrow it. When your energy is low, you seek light. When it's time to recover, you shift away from screens and allow the visual system to relax. These are small behaviors with massive neurological consequences. They train your system to become adaptable, responsive, and aligned with the demands of each moment, not by chance, but through deliberate biological control. Mate, the brain does not operate at a steady, continuous pace throughout the day. Instead, it runs in cycles, waves of heightened and diminished alertness known as Ultradian rhythms. These natural rhythms last approximately 90 to 120 minutes and are foundational to how attention, creativity, memory, and performance fluctuate across the day. Learning to work with these cycles rather than against them is one of the most effective ways to enhance cognitive capacity, sharpen focus, and preserve long-term energy. This is the essence of timed focus blocks, strategically aligning deep work or learning sessions with the brain's natural peaks in alertness and focus. In each ultradian cycle, there is a period typically lasting 60 to 90 minutes when mental acuity, motivation, and memory formation are at their peak. ESLM. This is when the brain is primed for complex problem solving, high-level concentration, and creative insight. During this phase, dopamine and acetylcholine levels rise, increasing motivation and the ability to lock into a single task. Attention becomes more sustained, distractions are easier to resist, and the brain is more plastic, meaning it is more capable of encoding and consolidating new information. This is the biological window where learning and high performance are naturally amplified. After this period of intense focus, however, the system needs to reset. There's a decline phase, usually 20 to 30 minutes, where brain chemistry begins to shift, mental energy dips, and performance diminishes. Diminishes. Many people override this with caffeine, noise, or multitasking, but doing so depletes the system and reduces the quality of focus in the next cycle. Those who instead take a break through movement, non-sleep, deep rest, or even just shifting to a low-demand task, allow their brain to recover. This recovery is not laziness. It is part of the cycle of mastery. The rest period recharges neurotransmitter levels and restores the brain's ability to enter deep focus once again. Timed focus blocks leverage these cycles with intention. Rather than trying to push through 4 or 5 hours of continuous concentration, you deliberately segment your work into 90-minute intervals. During these blocks, you eliminate distractions, set a singular goal, and fully immerse yourself in the task. This could be writing, studying, problem-solving, training, or any high-value activity. No task switching, no digital interruptions. The goal is to enter a state of deep engagement, what's often called a flow. In this state, time distorts, performance heightens, and memory consolidation strengthens. The brain loves this kind of sustained immersion, and over time, it becomes easier and faster to enter. But the key is what happens next. After each block, you stop. You deliberately downshift. This doesn't mean doing nothing. It means entering a different brain state. Light movement, stepping outside, breath work, or a few minutes of unfocused visual gaze are all effective ways to signal to the nervous system that recovery has begun. This rest allows your next focus block to begin with a fresh surge of cognitive power rather than a depleted, foggy mind trying to push through fatigue. It's a rhythm. Work, rest, repeat. And when practiced consistently, it trains the brain to perform on demand with greater precision and less effort. Ultradian-based scheduling is not about rigidity. It's about resonance, matching your mental demands to the internal waves your biology already follows. When people ignore these rhythms, they often find themselves working longer but producing less, feeling busy but not effective, exhausted without understanding why. But when you build your day around these blocks, 2 to 4 of them spaced across the most alert hours, you begin to unlock a cognitive edge. You get more done with higher quality and with less strain. The body and brain begin to trust the pattern. Energy stabilizes. Focus deepens. Recovery becomes part of the workflow. Timed focus blocks are not just a productivity hack. They are a system for neural alignment. They respect the biology of performance. And over time, they don't just make you smarter or faster. They make your cognitive abilities sustainable. They allow you to show up with clarity, intensity, and presence again and again without burnout. That is the mark of real intelligence, working with the system, not against it. Intentional challenge seeking is a cornerstone of brain health and cognitive growth rooted deeply in the principle of neuroadaptive stress. Unlike chronic stress, which overwhelms the system and causes breakdown, Neuroadaptive stress is a carefully dosed, purposeful exposure to difficulty that pushes your nervous system just beyond its comfort zone. This type of stress acts as a biological signal for adaptation, growth, and enhanced resilience. It is the process by which your brain rewires itself, becoming stronger, faster, and more flexible in the face of future challenges. Seeking out these challenges intentionally is not just beneficial, it is essential for unlocking higher cognitive function and psychological robustness. At the heart of this principle is the understanding that the brain thrives on novelty and complexity. When faced with something difficult, the brain activates pathways that release neuromodulators like dopamine, norepinephrine, and brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF. These chemicals are critical for learning, memory formation, and synaptic plasticity. The key, however, is that the challenge must be calibrated correctly, too easy, and the brain remains in its comfort zone, producing no lasting change. Too hard, and the system becomes overwhelmed, leading to anxiety, fatigue, and even damage. Intentional challenge seeking is about finding that sweet spot, the zone of proximal development, where growth is optimized. This concept is not limited to intellectual tasks. It applies equally to physical, emotional, and social domains. Physically, this might mean engaging in high-intensity exercise that pushes muscular and cardiovascular limits, but with adequate recovery. Cognitively, it could be learning a new skill, tackling complex problems, or deliberately working on tasks that require sustained attention and creative thinking. Emotionally, it involves facing fears, navigating difficult conversations, or embracing vulnerability. Each of these stressors, when approached intentionally and mindfully, signals the brain to adapt, creating stronger neural circuits and more efficient processing. Importantly, neuroadaptive stress is always accompanied by recovery. The brain does not grow during the challenge itself, but during the periods of rest that follow. During rest, synaptic connections are strengthened or pruned, and the nervous system recalibrates to a new baseline of capability. Without this recovery, the challenge becomes purely damaging, tipping into chronic stress. This is why intentional challenge seeking must be paired with strategies for sleep, nutrition, mindfulness, and physical recovery. These support systems ensure that each dose of stress is constructive, not destructive. By habitually seeking challenges within this adaptive zone, you create a positive feedback loop. Each successful encounter increases your tolerance for complexity and difficulty, expanding the boundaries of what you consider manageable. Over time, you develop cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift perspectives, adapt to new information, and problem solve creatively. You become more emotionally resilient, able to navigate uncertainty and pressure without becoming overwhelmed. Physically, your endurance and strength grow. This kind of integrative resilience is what separates reactive minds from proactive ones, what enables leaders, innovators, and creators to thrive under pressure. This approach also rewires motivation. Dopamine, the neurochemical of pursuit and reward, is released in anticipation of challenge. When you learn to associate difficulty with positive growth rather than avoidance or fear, your brain begins to crave the process of overcoming obstacles itself. This shifts your mindset from one of avoidance to one of curiosity and engagement. Challenges stop being threats and become opportunities for self-expression and mastery. Intentional challenge seeking cultivates a profound sense of agency. You are no longer at the mercy of external circumstances or internal inertia. Instead, you become an active architect of your brain's capacity and your psychological landscape. You design experiences that promote growth, resilience, and adaptability. This transforms how you engage with the world, not passively reacting to life's difficulties, but actively inviting and mastering them. Ultimately, the brain's greatest capacity lies in its ability to change. Intentional challenge seeking leverages that capacity, turning stress into a tool for evolution rather than a source of breakdown. It is a deliberate, mindful practice of pushing boundaries with purpose and care. By embracing this principle, you transform stress from enemy to ally, vulnerability from weakness to strength, and challenge from obstacle to pathway. This is the secret to lasting intelligence, creativity, and power, growing not in spite of adversity, but because of it. Embracing intentional challenge seeking is not merely a strategy. It is a declaration of your commitment to growth and mastery. By harnessing neuroadaptive stress with awareness and care, you transform the very nature of struggle into a catalyst for profound change. The brain's ability to adapt, to become stronger and more resilient, is unlocked only when you step beyond comfort and into purposeful challenge. This is where true power lives, not in avoiding difficulty, but in meeting it head-on with intention, patience, and courage. Your greatest potential lies not in ease, but in your willingness to push, recover, and rise again. Choose challenge, choose growth, choose to become the architect of your own evolution.